The transfer. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you're ready to step into a place the US government never wants you to see, because once you're inside the story, there's no easy way out. The sirens cut through the mountain air just before dawn, echoing off the jagged peaks of southern Colorado. A convoy of armored vehicles tore down an otherwise empty highway, headlights slicing through the fog like knives. State troopers flanked the transport, rifles visible through reinforced windows, eyes fixed forward. This wasn't a drug bust or a routine prisoner move. This was a relocation reserved for men whose very existence was considered a national threat. At the center of the convoy sat a single inmate, shackled at the wrists, waist, and ankles. His name never appeared on the transport manifest. Instead, he was identified by a number and a destination, ADX Florence. 20 miles away, the prison rose out of the desert like a concrete mirage. No watchtowers. No razor wire spirals. Just clean lines, thick walls, and silence so heavy it felt deliberate. ADX Florence didn't announce itself as a prison. It looked more like a research facility, something designed to erase mistakes, not correct them. Inside, a small team of federal officials waited. Among them was Special Agent Daniel Mercer, a man who had spent 15 years tracking criminal networks that thrived on fear and loyalty. He'd seen cartel compounds, underground tunnels, and mass graves. Yet standing beneath the fluorescent lights of ADX Florence's intake corridor, Mercer felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. This prison wasn't built to stop violence. It was built to stop influence. The inmate was escorted through a series of automated steel doors, each one sealing with a hydraulic thud that echoed long after it closed. No words were exchanged. At ADX Florence, conversation was considered a vulnerability. The walls were poured concrete. The floors were polished stone. Every surface was cold, smooth, and unyielding. The cell measured 7 by 12 feet. A concrete bed jutted from the wall. A stainless steel sink and toilet were molded into a single unit. A narrow window, positioned too high to see the horizon, let in a sliver of natural light. This was where men disappeared without dying. Mercer watched as the final door locked. The inmate didn't react. He didn't shout or resist. He simply looked around, as if calculating the room the way a chess player studies a board. That calm disturbed Mercer more than any outburst could have. ADX Florence held terrorists, mass murderers, and organized crime leaders whose orders once crossed continents. One of them was Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Since his arrival, the prison had become a symbol, proof that even the most powerful criminal empires could be cut off at the root. Or so the public was told. But Mercer knew better. Over the past 6 months, federal investigators had intercepted encrypted communications tied to drug routes, money laundering operations, and coordinated hits. The troubling part wasn't the content. It was the timing. These messages carried strategic precision identical to operations run years earlier by men who were now supposed to be completely isolated. Men like El Chapo. Officially, ADX Florence inmates spent 23 hours a day alone, with communication tightly monitored and movement strictly controlled. Unofficially, something wasn't adding up. Orders were still being followed. Loyalties still enforced. Power still flowing outward from a place designed to suffocate it. That morning, Mercer received a sealed file marked Internal Review. Inside were transcripts, redacted photos, and a single line that made his stomach drop. Evidence suggests operational influence originating from within ADX Florence. If that was true, it meant the prison had failed at its only purpose. As Mercer closed the file, an alarm sounded somewhere deep within the facility. Not loud. Not panicked. Just enough to signal that something had gone wrong. A guard approached, face pale, voice low. They found something during a routine cell inspection, he said. It wasn't supposed to be there. Mercer followed him down a long, silent corridor toward a locked door that almost never opened. And when they stepped inside, Mercer realized ADX Florence wasn't just containing dangerous men. It was hiding something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The room smelled faintly of metal and disinfectant, the kind of sterile scent meant to erase history. On the steel table lay the object recovered from the cell inspection. A strip of paper no wider than a finger, folded tight and sealed inside clear plastic. To the untrained eye, it looked harmless. No ink. No symbols. Just a blank sliver of paper that shouldn't have existed inside ADX Florence at all. Special Agent Daniel Mercer studied it under the harsh lights. "That wasn't smuggled in," he said quietly. "It was made here." The guard standing across from him swallowed. Inmate had no writing materials. No books. No contact visits. He's been on isolation status for 9 months. ADX Florence ran on a concept known internally as the silence protocol. Every movement was logged. Every item inventoried. Every human interaction minimized. In theory, nothing moved through the prison without being seen. In reality, Mercer was starting to understand that the prison's greatest strength, its predictability, had become its biggest weakness. The paper wasn't blank. Under infrared light, faint impressions emerged. Indentations. Pressure marks. A message written, erased, then rewritten on another surface. Old-school tradecraft. The kind cartel leaders used decades ago, before encryption and burner phones. Mercer felt a chill. Someone's passing instructions. Within hours, the bureau sealed the wing. Guards were polled, supervisors questioned, surveillance footage reviewed frame by frame. Nothing obvious appeared. No suspicious handoffs. No extended conversations. No breaches. And yet, the messages outside kept coming. In Chicago, a money courier changed routes at the last second, avoiding a DA checkpoint no one knew about. In Los Angeles, a witness scheduled to testify against a cartel lieutenant vanished from a protected apartment without signs of forced entry. In Arizona, a trusted informant was found dead, staged to look like an overdose. Each event traced back to operational patterns once attributed to El Chapo's inner circle. Officially, El Chapo sat alone in a concrete box, eating meals slid through a slot, speaking to no one. Unofficially, his shadow still stretched across borders. Mercer requested access to El Chapo's cell block. The warden hesitated. "You know the rules. No interviews. No exceptions." "This isn't an interview," Mercer replied. "It's a threat assessment." The walk to the cell felt longer than it should have. Doors opened and closed in sequence, each one separating Mercer further from the outside world. When they finally stopped, Mercer stood before a solid steel door with no window. Just a number. Inside, El Chapo sat on his concrete bed, hands resting on his knees. He looked thinner than his courtroom photos, older than his reputation suggested. His eyes lifted slowly, calm and alert, as if he'd been expecting company. No words were exchanged. They weren't allowed to be. Mercer noticed the details instead. The way El Chapo's gaze moved, not randomly, but methodically. The faint scuff marks near the vent. The mattress corners slightly lifted, as if adjusted repeatedly. ADX Florence cells were designed to eliminate improvisation. And yet, improvisation was exactly what Mercer was seeing. Back in the operations room, the investigation took a darker turn. A junior analyst flagged a pattern in guard rotations. The same 3 officers had worked overlapping shifts near high-risk inmates for months. All 3 had clean records. All 3 had passed background checks. All 3 had unexplained financial activity. Before Mercer could push further, one of those guards failed to report for duty. His car was found abandoned 20 miles from the prison, engine cold, keys still inside. No signs of struggle. No body. Just silence. As night settled over ADX Florence, Mercer stood alone in the corridor, listening to the low hum of the facility. This prison was supposed to be the end of the line. The place where criminal empires went to die. Instead, it felt like the center of something still very much alive. And somewhere within these walls, someone was proving that even total isolation could be turned into a weapon. The missing guard's name was never released to the public. Inside ADX Florence, his absence was handled the same way everything else was handled. Quietly, efficiently, and without questions that might linger too long. His badge access was revoked. His locker emptied. His shift reassigned. It was as if he had never existed. That was the most disturbing part. Special Agent Daniel Mercer stood in the surveillance control room as analysts replayed months of footage at double speed. Patterns emerged where randomness was supposed to exist. Meal deliveries that paused half a second too long. Cleaning carts that stopped in identical positions outside different cells. Guards adjusting cameras under the pretense of maintenance, creating blind spots measured not in minutes, but in moments. Moments were all it took. ADX Florence didn't leak information through conversations or contraband phones. It leaked through routine, through repetition, through people who believed they were invisible because the system was too big to notice them. The breakthrough came from a maintenance report no one had questioned. During a scheduled inspection, a technician had replaced vent covers in 3 cells, El Chapo's included. The covers were identical to the originals, down to the serial numbers. Except they weren't solid. They were layered. Inside the metal were micro-etched grooves, invisible unless separated under magnification. Not messages. Not letters. Coordinates. Dates. Instructions that only someone trained to look for patterns could decode. A language built on absence. Mercer understood then. This wasn't about smuggling notes. It was about testing loyalty. The prison wasn't being breached. It was being studied. Federal agents moved fast. The 3 compromised guards were detained. Financial records linked them to shell companies tied to cartel money laundering networks. One broke within hours, shaking, voice cracking as he explained how it started. A favor. A delivery delay. A suggestion that nothing bad would happen if he looked the other way. The threat was never spoken. It didn't need to be. The cartel's reach had always thrived on implication. When Mercer returned to El Chapo's cell for the final time, the prison felt different. Tighter. Alert. As if it knew it was being watched. El Chapo sat in the same position as before. Same calm. Same silence. You didn't send messages, Mercer said, knowing the cameras would capture every word. You sent a signal. El Chapo's eyes lifted, just slightly. A flicker of something passed across his face. Not fear, not anger, but recognition. The truth was devastating in its simplicity. El Chapo no longer needed to run an empire. He only needed to prove he still could. Every successful transmission from inside ADX Florence reinforced his legend on the outside. Loyalty wasn't maintained through orders, but through belief. If he could reach out from the most secure prison on Earth, then no one was beyond his protection. Or his punishment. The Bureau shut down the compromised wing. Procedures were rewritten. Oversight expanded. Publicly, the case was framed as an internal security upgrade. No failures. No names. No admission that ADX Florence had been used as a stage. El Chapo remained in his cell, more isolated than ever. And yet, 3 months later, a cartel lieutenant in Europe was arrested carrying a coded ledger. When decoded, one line stood out to Mercer immediately. A date. A location. And a phrase that matched the micro-etching pattern exactly. Silence is not the same as absence. ADX Florence still stands, its concrete walls unbroken, its reputation intact. To the world, it remains a fortress where influence goes to die. But for those who've seen what happens inside, the truth is harder to ignore. Control isn't about walls or locks. It's about understanding the system better than the people who built it. And somewhere in a 7 by 12-foot cell, a man sits alone, perfectly still, proving that even buried power can still cast a very long shadow. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one.